Hello and welcome to A Piece of String, the show that brings together comedians and scientific minds to ask and maybe answer the biggest of all questions ever. I'm Matthew Shribman, I'm a chemist and a bit of a biophysicist, and with me today are Josie Peters, an astrophysicist.
Hello.
Sophie Ward, a biomedic and neuroscience enthusiast.
Hello.
And James Hay, an epidemiologist.
Hello.
Each of us will ask a question to which one of us secretly knows the answer, and points will be allocated on a tyro-arbitrary basis by our producer, Sam Lee. The winner will get this paper magic wand that I just pulled out of my bag.
That nearly put my eye out then.
But in a way that was amazing and cool,
Exactly. Oh, I'm scared, but I'm also thrilled.
right?
Matthew is repeatedly extending and retracting his wand. and we're all in awe.
So, Sophie, what's your question for us today?
My question is, Matthew, how do animals make group decisions? Like a group of animals, how do they make a decision? To reword that question.
Do they just have like a nice little chat and a vote like we do?
Yeah, well, if they can't have a chat, Jose, yeah? Think about it. Check your human privilege. You can communicate, right?
Maybe
Animals
they're speaking a special language that we just don't know how to listen to.
And like clicks and whistles, like dolphin style.
Yeah, or wiggling your bum.
Like
The
a baby.
bum wiggle. There's that thing about ant democracy, isn't there? When they're going to go and find food.
Oh, like quorum sensing, is that what it's called?
I mean, you know all the technical words, James.
It is called quorum sensing. I misled you to believe I didn't know. So basically, an ant goes to a patch and it thinks, right, how good is this patch? And it just kind of wanders around for, I think, about 2 minutes. And they think, is it in good lighting? Is there good abundance of food?
Oh, is this for like finding a new nest?
Yeah, finding a new nest. And like, I
Okay.
think it'll be like, so the similar mechanism for nest or like foraging. So for the nest one though, they kind of assess a good patch. And then if they think it's good, depending on how good it is, they go back to the nest and they recruit a few mates, and then the mates come back. And the mates have a look and the mates go, yeah, I agree, it's pretty good. Then they go back and get more mates. And once you've got a certain threshold of mates that have looked up the quality of the new nest site, then they just go back to the nest, start physically carrying their other mates to the new nest.
They're chanting while they carry them.
New nest, new nest. So what's really interesting about this though is that they can obviously each individual ant makes an assessment on how good quality they think the patch is, right? So if you're in a situation where the quality of the patch is fixed, then they'll move to the new patch if it's better. But what if you have like a fluctuating quality of patch? So like, I can't remember I think it's like called homogenization theory, that you can like, if you average out loads of random stuff, then you make a decision based on like the average of all the random outcomes, right? And so ants can do this as well. So they did an experiment where they kind of gave ants 2 choices for nest. One, like a mediocre nest that was fixed, and then another nest which varied in quality over like a certain amount of time. So
Like sometimes it would have loads of sun, sometimes
Yeah.
it would
But on average, it
have
was
none.
what, slightly
But
better?
on average, they could measure whether it was better than the other patch, worse, or the same.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the ants actually chose to go to the fluctuating patch only if it was better on average.
Wow, so it's like they're doing little
Wow.
stats.
Yes,
in
they're
their
doing
head.
stats, right? And which makes sense, right? Because it's the average of all those individual ants' decisions. So like maybe most of the ants go when it's a better patch, so they come back and say, yes, great. Some ants go, rubbish, mate, rubbish.
And is this all done with the bum dragging scent
And I
thing?
think I'm actually not sure if this is done with bum dragging. I think there's a lot of bum dragging involved to like keep a trail. But I think the recruitment is based on like actually going back and grabbing their mates to say, come back and have a look at what I found.
So in many ways, like a human body is like loads of animals making decisions together because we're loads of animal cells that are all kind of coordinating. Or is that not really what was supposed to be?
Interesting.
Ooh,
No,
I
I think
guess.
that's relevant, yeah.
What is it with? What is it with 50% microbiome or something?
that's
Oh,
all
you're talking
the
about number of
bacteria in
cells.
us,
If you're talking about
yeah.
number of cells, then yeah, it's about, I can't remember the numbers, but it's I think it's 55% of the cells inside us are bacterial cells. But they're much, much smaller. Most of them are in the colon as well.
But if you're talking about our cells making a decision, there's often like a driving leader. So if you think about like your daily rhythms, like your 24-hour rhythms, it's not just sleep. You also have rhythms of like alertness and when you're hungry and stuff. And that's all controlled by a bit of your brain called the chiasmatic nucleus. But then that then sends a message. Basically, that is controlled by light,
Super
essentially.
charismatic nucleus.
Yeah, super charismatic nucleus, expecto patronum. Anyway, so then this part of your brain then like sends signals. So all of your cells in your body essentially have also a 24-hour rhythm, but it's kind of led by this bit in your brain. But it's a bit nasty because they call it like slave oscillations, like your slave cells. Yeah, that
So it's just a big dictatorship.
Yeah, exactly. That
cells.
all your other cells are like, oh yeah, we'll follow the 24-hour rhythm that you're setting us to, the superchiasmatic nucleus.
So like all of these examples are like where you either have kind of everyone's invested in a common goal, right? And so they kind of defer all decision making to either like say the brain or like what's the interest of the queen giving, birth to offspring, right? But what about in like social groups where I don't know, say like pigeons or like dogs or whatever, where each individual has, what's at the best interest of an individual might differ to what's at the best interest of a group.
Yeah, that's true actually. Like, but then I guess when you think of animals like dogs, like pack mentality, I guess will that still be led by some sort of alpha?
Yeah, so I'm kind of merging with the actual answer here, the end answer here, but basically like...
Oh wait, have you researched the answer?
Yeah.
Ah, go on, mate, give us the answer.
Well,
Shall I just-
well, let us
Shall I
have it.
just keep
Feed it
us-
in.
Yeah.
Oh, go on, mate, go on.
So it's kind of like... It's like a game theory problem, basically. So has everyone kind of come across
Oh,
game
tell me
theory
about
before?
game theory. Go on.
So game theory is basically the idea that but without game theory, there wouldn't be much of an explanation for why betrayal always happens, right? So in group making decisions, there's always a bit of betrayal. So yeah, game theory, the classic one is prisoner's dilemma. So basically, if you and your mate have committed a really naughty crime, then you're both on trial, then you can either betray your mate or you can confess to the crime. And if you both confess to the crime, then you'll get a kind of like medium sentence that isn't too bad because you're being honest. But if you betray your mate, they'll get a really, really bad sentence and you will get absolutely nothing. And if you both try and betray one another, then you'll both get a really bad sentence. And so the ideal is if you both just cooperate and you're both just like, oh yeah, we both just did it, and you both get the medium sentence, but there's always the temptation to betray the other one.
Yeah, so game theory kind of like underpins most of evolution. So if you can imagine like a social group of animals and they want to make a group decision, they want to make the decision that benefits the group as a whole, but also obviously individuals act in their own self-interest as much as possible because that's selfish gene, that's natural selection. So when you're kind of you want a group of animals to make a group decision, you think, well, how can we take into account the interests of all the animals? And actually animals go through like voting processes just like we do. So there was a study last year in African wild dogs, and basically what they found is that dogs actually sneezed to indicate if they wanted to vote for like a movement or like to move to a new foraging patch, right?
Wow.
What if they just had hay fever? You're being very agreeable today, Richard. I just have a bit of a cold, actually. Sorry.
So yeah, basically they form these kind of like social groups and they all look at each other and they start sneezing, and they found that when there was loads of sneezing, they were more likely to move to say a new patch. But also interestingly, they found that the dominant individuals, so those that had the most pups, their sneezes carried much more weight, right? So like if I'm a more dominant individual, then I need half as many sneezes to agree to my proposal. So isn't that really cool? There's like democracy and like hierarchy in animals. So like the kind of voting system that animals have kind of depends on the social structure of the group. So if you have like a species where there's like clear dominance hierarchies, so like these like hunting dogs, but also certain species of macaques. So I think it's called like rhesus macaque. They have really like strong hierarchical structures. All of these kind of systems, they have voting, but in those really dominant ones, they kind of defer the weighting of the decision to the more dominant individuals. And so this makes sense if you imagine that maybe the dominant individual has more information. So you obviously want to follow the individual which has the most information. So the dominant individual might be the oldest one with the most experience. But equally, other species of macaques, say Tonkean macaques, they're like quite an equal hierarchical structure. And in this situation, every individual has an equal weighting when making group decisions.
Cool. That's like a socialist group.
Yeah, it's cool.
And I think they've proven mathematically that democratic animal systems have the highest per individual payoffs. So basically showing that democratic systems work better for the individual than ones dominated by
Which
a
makes
couple of
sense
individuals.
in terms of game theory, because in game theory, it is always better if you cooperate overall.
Yeah.
It's just that there's always the temptation to better yourself.
And a lot of this is driven by the fact that decisions made by dominant individuals tend to be more extreme because they favor one individual's preference really strongly, whereas decisions made by groups are the average of everyone's interests, so those decisions tend to be quite mild.
So that's this idea of survival of the fittest, where fittest is fittest plural.
Yeah, but you also have to be really careful and not go into this like group selection idea of
Okay.
the strongest group. It's still the best decision for the individual.
If you feel like we should move on to the next question, let's all vote with our sneezes. 3, 2, 1. Achoo! And James had the most powerful sneeze, so
My sneeze was absent. I want to stay on this question forever.
yeah, well, you're bottom of the hierarchy, Matt, sorry.
Okay. Josie, have you got a question for us today?
I do indeed. And the question is, how much of your brain do you actually need?
It's all computers these days, isn't it?
It's all computer. Yeah,
Don't need any brain.
Yeah.
Because we definitely need all of our brain, all the way.
Plants don't have brains. They're perfectly happy.
Loads of plants, mate.
Almost all of them.
They don't have
Brainless.
parties though. I enjoy a party.
Exactly,
never
that's
been
the
to a
main
party.
function of the brain.
Yeah, but what is it? Come on. What is a party? I think if you start to look at what a party is, plants are in a continuous state of party.
Go on,
Well,
justify.
come on.
Justify your answer.
What's a bouquet? That's a party of plants.
Yeah.
All dying together.
Actually, that's
not a
what
happy
party is.
party.
We're all just dying
Contemplate
together.
our own existence.
No, you need your brain. Well, I mean, your brain gets like pruned, doesn't it? Similarly to plants. Like you have you have loads and loads of neurons when you're a little wee babby, and then kind of more useless connections die off. So, for example, you don't need the part of your brain that connects vision to go to your spinal cord. Yeah,
Ooh,
so
and-
that just cut that one off.
And like those
Chilled.
things where they show the ability of adult humans can't tell the difference between like two sheep or monkeys or whatever, but human babies or very young humans can tell the difference, but they start to lose that skill because it's not useful.
Yeah.
Whereas they build stronger the one to
Oh,
tell
that's
between
cool.
different human faces.
Mm.
But it's not that like adults. Then you think, well, surely then babies' brains are better. But it's not that when adults lose their neurons, then they're losing certain connections, but they're also building other connections, like building synapses, which are the bits that connect neurons together. And also we're getting more efficient brains. So like your neurons have stuff like kind of insulation around them that makes the messages send faster. So, because that always confused me. I was like, if we've had our brains pruned, then why don't we just always have baby brains? But it's because your machine is focusing on what you need, so it works more efficiently.
Yeah, there's that cool thing where, when you're born, you can like recognize all the different languages really easily, right? But also, with recognizing faces as well, babies are so much better at recognizing between different faces of even different animals as well. Like we look at like cows, and they generally look quite similar, right? And then there's this generally kind of like racist thing that occurs where people are like, oh well, everyone who's like X from X part of the world, like they all look the same.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really just based on like where you grow up and who you're surrounded by, because then when you're developing, you learn to recognize the difference between those faces a lot better. So, for example, like more like Caucasian, like Western people like, tend to look at hair color a bit more when they're telling the difference between one another. Whereas like Chinese people will more look at like the angle of the eyes and the shape of the eyes. There's a lot more like way that you can tell the difference between people in that way in that part of the world. And it's a skill that you have as a baby, and then you kind of lose it if you grew up over here.
So I guess then when you say how much of the brain do we need, I guess we've lost the bits that we don't seem to need, right? Because there's loads of the way that we study the brain, because you can't chop into someone's brain and like start like fiddling about with what does what necessarily that well when someone's alive. Although you can, when you do brain surgery, the brain itself doesn't have pain receptors. So there are experiments where people start sticking in electrodes and seeing how people react. But a lot of the way we study the brain is we find people that have had accidents or have issues with particular parts of the brain and then see what they can or can't do. So there's loads of examples of where it's like, oh, we think this part of the brain has a role because they had it chopped out and then they suddenly didn't
Who's
do
that
this
lad
thing.
who got a pole in his
Phineas
head?
Gage, yeah. Phineas Gage, he
Phineas
does what he
Gage.
likes, gets a pole in his head, changes forever. Yeah, Phineas Gage. He basically got a railroad like pole like rammed
Yeah.
through his eye, and it gave him a frontal lobe injury, which is like the front part of your brain, hence frontal. And he had like personality changes. So, and they said he was previously a really nice guy, and then he actually was a bit of a knob. So afterwards, that's the thing we now know. We now think, oh, maybe that has a role in emotion and maybe even personality. So that's how people make connections with the brain.
'Cause I feel like, what do you mean by like how much of your brain do you need? So, I mean, it's like to survive, to
process
function.
like a
Exactly,
normal
because
person,
he
I
was
guess.
fine, right?
And now we're in
technically.
philosophy.
Yeah. What is it to need?
What is a brain?
Yeah. What are a brain?
To be able to function, I reckon how much do you need to be able to function as like a member of society that someone
So that
wouldn't
no one
realise that you
suspects
had
you're
less
missing
brain?
any brain. Yeah.
This is obviously quite a broad question. I feel like, does anyone actually feel like they've come up with a legit answer to it?
Yeah, I think I've got one.
Oh, you
So yeah, when I started looking into this, I sort of wanted to know about lobotomy first, because I've seen in films that, you know, when people get lobotomies, which is when you kind of a lot of their frontal lobe, these people can often become quite like vegetables. They lose a lot of their emotions, a lot of their ability to think freely. And I was wondering if this was actually always that extreme. And sometimes it is, and sometimes these things are done so badly that they can actually kill the person who they're being done on. But sometimes they're not that bad. I mean, I say they're not that bad. They're obviously like a really terrible thing to happen to any human being, and you would never ever want it to happen to you, because you're essentially having a load of your consciousness destroyed in a very physical way. But some people who have them still have emotions, and they still have self-awareness, and it is. But the reason that these things were used, and maybe still are used, I don't actually know, is that they made violent inmates easier to control. Adults. It wasn't always permanent. Some people could recover.
There are these people who have got a condition called hydrocephalus, which is basically this thing called water on the brain, where you have too much of the cerebrospinal fluid, and people's brains can shrink by up to 75%. And they can, it's so funny when you read about this, it's people are going like, oh, and he still had a wife and 2 children and a job. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of your level of like functionality for what's normal.
Also, interestingly, if you say that you might not want to be a vegetable, there's a guy called Adrian Owen, and he's written a book called Into the Grey Zone, and it's about communicating with people who are in a vegetative state. So basically, when you think about doing an action, a part of your brain activates. So if you think about playing tennis, a bit of your brain lights up. What they've done is they've put people who are in a vegetative state in a scanner, and then they've asked them questions and said, if you can hear me, think about playing tennis. And basically they've got now a yes-no way of communicating with people, because if they think about playing tennis, that bit of the brain lights up and stuff like that. So, and then they ask the more direct questions like, if you have a daughter called Janet, like, think about playing tennis. And if they did, they thought about it. And if they didn't, they didn't. So people in a vegetative state we might be able to communicate with them more than we thought. And actually, you ask them things like, oh, you know, are you in pain? And they seem to say no, I believe. And then it gets complicated when they say things like, would you want to no longer continue living? It's really interesting. But just something to think about. Vegetative states aren't like an end game necessarily. People might still be able to take in what's around them.
Wow.
Is the idea like some scenarios are easier to kind of see in brain patterns than, so if I just say imagine the word yes to answer my
so
question.
they have to imagine doing a physical action,
Okay.
because it's like
That's
that
interesting.
yeah. It's really cool, really, really cool. But that just reminded me when you said about vegetative state.
That's cool.
The final proper answer that I found that seems quite interesting is that for severe epilepsy, there is a surgery which is literally called half brain removal, where they remove half of your brain, which sounds incredibly extreme. But doing this surgery, there's no apparent loss of any memory, nor change in personality. It just stops all of the seizures entirely. Now, negative side effects include that you will lose control of the opposite hand of the side of the brain that's removed, and some of the functionality of the opposite arm, and some of the vision in the opposite eye as well. But many patients actually showed actual improvement in academic performance having had one half of their brain removed, perhaps to do with the fact that they then are no longer suffering from epilepsy. In fact, yeah, there was even a story about one young American patient who became a chess champion of his state with only half a brain.
Wow.
You literally remove half of the brain.
Wow.
See, I guess that works because you have there's not like one part of the brain that does one thing. There are like different parts that do different things
Is the brain
together.
symmetric?
Hemispherectomy is a very rare neurological procedure in which the cerebral hemisphere, in brackets half of the brain, is removed, disconnected, or disabled.
there's this study of this guy HM, and he had epilepsy really, really severe. So they removed part of his brain. They turned out they removed a bit of the hippocampus, called hippocampus because it looks like a seahorse, which is really important in memory. And basically, when they removed this bit of his brain, he couldn't remember things. He couldn't make new long-term memories, right? So he could remember everything from up to 2 years before his surgery. So it's thought that like after 2 years, your memories are stored somewhere other than the hippocampus. And then he couldn't remember anything there. And then he couldn't make any new memories. He couldn't form a long-term memory. It's about like that film 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore, Ben Stiller, which I used to absolutely love that film. Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys? What a tune.
Aww.
But yeah, so it's like that. So if this half brain thing is a thing, that's kind of amazing.
Can you make 2 people? If you cut the brain in half,
Oh, we're
different
getting
that,
insight.
Oh.
which is
Yeah.
the original
Doctor
person?
territory now.
James, you up for it, mate?
Let's do it, mate.
Okay.
Let's do it right now.
Or swap one of your halves with each other, and then you're both.
They used to be best friends. Coming this fall. Brain swap.
And now for the mystery midsection. Just before we started the show, I gave everyone the following question.
Children like to dress up as their favourite fictional characters, but what effect does this have on their education?
I then asked everyone to write down a fictional but reasonable sounding answer. I will now read out all of those answers with the real answer mixed in. Everyone will then get the chance to decide which answer they think is right. Here we go. Children are more likely to persevere with difficult tasks when imagining they are someone else. It has a positive effect because they believe they can be anything they want to be. Better self-esteem means more learning. It helps to anchor children in reality, heightening their ability to separate fiction from fact. Children who spend a lot of time dressed up are found to be better at reasoning and problem solving. Children who are dressed up are more likely to use positive adjectives when writing. Children who are dressed up are only able to retain information that the fictional character is believed to have. James, you look confused, so I'm going to come to you first.
They're all well convincing again.
Yeah, there's no
What,
jovial.
Even the one about like...
I mean, I dressed up as Gandalf once, and then I knew all the magic.
That was all you knew.
That was all I knew for that period of time.
Sorry, James, during this period, were you ever late to anything?
A wizard is never late, Matthew.
I see, right.
That's really tough. I think I like to believe they can be anything because that's really nice, and I think that
I think that's the lamest.
I think it's the lamest,
Aw.
but because of that,
Sometimes the truth is lame.
Yeah, sometimes the truth is lame.
Persevering. We've got the one about being what you want to be. We've got the one about reasoning and problem solving. Got positive adjectives while writing and retaining information. Well, that's a lot of options, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we best see what Josie wants to go for.
no.
That was a swerve and a
strategy
half,
here.
wasn't it? What do you
You're trying to
think?
suss out the game here.
I'm going to go for positive adjectives while writing.
What if you dress up as a baddie, though?
You look sneaky.
What if you dress up as, like, Sauron? What are the positive adjectives for Sauron?
Big.
Mysterious. Strong.
High.
Powerful.
Creative.
And creative, yeah.
He's very creative. Yeah.
He's certainly got ambition.
Worked his way up the ladder, didn't he? Started out as a cleaner. Josie, what do you think?
I think the one about anchoring children in reality, like maybe. Although I can imagine it could also go wrong the other way, where children believe, no, I am Spider-Man.
And that would be reality if you were Peter Parker as a child. Oh, nobody wouldn't have been Spider-Man then. Backtrack.
Fortune teller.
He's young in the new one, but not that young.
Spoilers.
Well, self-esteem, I reckon, like building self-esteem is also quite plausible. Yeah, oh darn it, I'll just go for the third one, reality and factor and
That's
fiction.
the anchoring one.
Because you've got to have quite a good, strong imagination to imagine that you're someone else. So I imagine that's a good skill.
So we've got a positive adjectives and an anchoring in reality. What do we
Oh,
have?
and you had the what?
What was mine? I think I went for. Well, I can't remember the answer now. I just remember it was really nice. Believe they can be anything they want
believe
to
they
be.
can be anything
What
they
was the
want to be.
benefit again? Or is that just a benefit in itself?
They believe they can be anything they want to be, so better self-esteem is more learning, equals more learning.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay, so the correct answer is the first one, that they are more likely to
Oh, that's my
persevere with
second
difficult
choice.
tasks, imagining they are someone else. So in this study, kids either dressed up as Bob the Builder, Batman, Dora the Explorer, or Rapunzel, and it was found that when they were told, oh, I want you to do this difficult task, but while you're doing it, I want you to think Rapunzel is doing this task, Rapunzel is doing this task. They were more likely to persevere and less
Wow,
likely
that's
to
so
go
cool.
and like play
That's cool.
play a game that they were like, you can always go on a break and play a distracting game.
Did they have any negative controls, like characters that are known for giving
So
up?
no, they didn't. But they had kids who were just being themselves, and then the other one was they had kids who were thinking of themselves in the third person. So they had kids that were being like, Sophie's doing this task, Sophie's doing this task, and then they had kids like, I am doing this task, I am doing this task, and the I ams did worst, the Sophie is did middle, and then the Batman did best. Now
And then
for
you
the
find the really-
news, so. Josie Peters, you fall into Matthew Shribman's slippery
No,
trap.
that's why you looked so sneaky.
However, Matthew Shribman, you fell into my slippery
I?
trap.
That was really
Positive
good.
adjectives.
Oh, I really like that one.
and you fell into my trap.
Oh my god, so many traps.
James, that one was so lame.
I think mine probably is true. If you
Yeah, I
feel
bet
good
it's-
about
I bet it's
yourself, you're
true.
gonna learn.
It's like role models, isn't it?
yeah.
And we are actually all dressed up as our favourite fictional characters today. That's why we're persevering.
Okay, I've got a question for everyone, if you'll tolerate it. Would life be better if we could hibernate?
Yes.
Thank you, James.
Great,
Josie, have
next
you got a question?
Why do you think yes?
I mean, there's no scientific basis for that answer. I just think that sounds like a good use of time.
Yeah, it'd be so sick, wouldn't it? All that
I mean, what-
sleepy
No, it
time.
wouldn't.
Why do animals hibernate? Is literally just to do with periods of the year when there's scarcity of resources, right?
I think so, to conserve energy.
Yeah, just conservation of energy. I mean, do you guys feel tired, run down, like you need a coffee?
Well,
I'm always on the coffee.
So on the subject of, I don't know if this counts as hibernation, but something really cool about cicadas. Do you know about the 13 and 17 year cicadas?
Yeah.
What is a cicada?
So cicadas like how do you describe
they're
it, James?
all over Animal Crossing. They're everywhere.
They're a little bit like kind of like crickets. They're like basically insects, and they hibernate. Well, Matthew's going to talk about it. They hibernate for very long times. They live in trees. They have wings, and they make really loud noises. They go, yeah.
Ah, so
Yeah.
It's like a
sometimes
maraca.
But yeah, so they well, I say hibernate. I don't know. I don't know if it actually is hibernation, but they stay underground for 13 or 17 years, depending on the cicada that it is. Just chilling, chewing on xylems, like feeding on and phloems and stuff. Just feeding on roots of plants. And then suddenly they all emerge all at the same time to mate with one another. And there's this theory that basically loads of them coming out all at the same time does this thing called predator satiation. So the idea is like the predators will definitely get full because there's so many of them to eat that most of them will be able to survive, which is quite cool. But the really cool thing is, what do you notice about 13 year and 17 year?
It's a prime number, Matthew.
They're both prime numbers. Oh, James maybe already knows this. But yeah, there's this theory that back when there used to be many, many more different kind of species of cicada, they would try to, or they basically evolved to try and avoid intermingling because that would be a less efficient way of breeding for some reason. And so if they only come out every 13 years, then they will never coincide with a 17-year cicada that only comes out every 17 years. Because the multiples will never match up because they're both prime.
It's also interesting the length of time as well, because it means that no predator can sync up its own reproductive cycle with that. Because 13 is obviously so long. So if you're, say, like a crow, like a population of crows, you can't just give birth every 13 years, right? You need to do it annually. So it means that you're just a really undesirable food source.
Oh.
Super clever. So it's really smart when these things like just, I think it's really cool when things all suddenly try to breed at the same time. Like I've got a friend who works on sea anemones.
I thought you were going to say, I've got a friend who's trying to breed.
Precise time.
Every 13 years.
Yes, it's big groups again. It's that time again.
No, but
ladies and
when it's not the time, he's perfectly docile. But when the 13 years comes, you take cover. But yeah, my mate Victor, who does not do that himself, but he works with sea anemones, and they do this amazing thing where they just like they measure, somehow detect the light of the moon, and they time their release of sexy gametes to like an exact period of a few minutes, and then all different species give off their gametes at like different precise times to mix with one another, so they don't pollute one another's gametes.
What is a gamete?
Gametes, like a sex cell, sexy gamete,
like a sperm or an egg.
sperm or an egg. Essentially,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Sleep's an interesting one, the hibernation, because we already spend about 30% of our lives asleep, right? So, if you've been married to someone for 60 years, you've actually technically been married for 40 years when you've been awake. So maybe we could I wonder if hibernation would be like chunking up that sleep time. Like if we hibernated, would we not then sleep at all in the day?
Just like get it all out of the way.
Yeah,
Just one big
exactly.
sleep.
Because sleep's important because,
Yeah.
for example, neurodegenerative diseases like where your brain starts degrading, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, they're associated with build-up, aggregations of protein. And it's thought that when we sleep, that's when these nasty proteins, as it were, get washed away, perhaps. So I think daily sleep's important, right? Because otherwise they might build up quicker rather than having one big tsunami wash away in hibernation.
Every time we blink, our brains have like a tiny, tiny little sleep, like a mini nap.
Really?
Suddenly blinking a lot more now.
Isn't the amount of sleep you need correlated with heart rate, as in the animal kingdom? So I think that so if you think of all mammals have pretty much the same maximum number of heartbeats in their life, but it's that mice. You might be about to debunk me.
No. That's true, but
Yeah.
humans just don't fit on that scale, right?
Okay, apart
Because
from
of
humans.
medicine,
Yeah.
I guess.
So if you imagine like a mouse has a really high heart rate, but they I think it's like 2 billion or something, some arbitrarily large number. But basically, so mice have a really high heart rate, elephants have a really low heart rate. But similarly, elephants only need 3 hours of sleep a day, whereas mice need about 18 hours or something.
Wow.
And then everything in between kind of falls on this correlation.
That's so smart. Oh, jeez.
So did anyone put
I was
together
going to say, I'm getting too excited to share the knowledge with you guys because I've looked up this hibernation jokery.
That jiggery and pokery put
Jiggery and pokery jokery. So really interesting how we were focusing on the idea that hibernation is like sleep, because it is not like sleep. In fact, animals that hibernate experience sleep deprivation. Because hibernation, one thing that I was thinking of is why would hibernation even be useful for humans? And mainly it's kind of the idea of probably space travel. So if we were going to go to Mars, it would take us about 8 months. And the journey would be a lot less boring if we just hibernated. But hibernation is a sequence of these mini hibernation spells called torpor. I'm going to spell for you, Torpor, torpor. Where you reduce your body temperature, your heart rate, that in turn reduces your metabolism, and you gradually, you become in a lesser state of activity, so you consume less of your important things like oxygen and your fat stores and stuff like that. But this also affects your brain. So you were saying about the positive effects of sleep on the brain. Well, because you're not sleeping and you're not getting the necessary amounts of oxygen to your brain, then actually hibernation can be bad for you. It's not actually the best thing to do. The very bottom line answer to this is if we don't need to hibernate, then please don't.
So it's like a necessity.
It's just
and
hard work.
Exactly. And different hibernation occurs all over the animal kingdom. You can have insects, amphibians, fish, mammals, birds, pretty much anything can hibernate. And people are trying to look into ways to induce this in humans, as I said, for sort of space travel reasons. So someone actually found an accidental thing that may be useful, because it's found that hamsters can hibernate, but rats can't. So someone put some hamster cells in a fridge, which hamster cells we know could survive because hamsters can hibernate, so they can survive down at cooler temperatures. And after accidentally leaving them in there too long, they found that the fridge smelt of rotten eggs. There was an enzyme in there that stimulated hydrogen sulfide being produced. And so what this student did, who'd left the hamster cells in, then poured this over the rat cells, which they known would have normally died when put in the fridge, and the cells actually survived.
Wow.
Wait,
cool.
so because a hamster can hibernate, that means its cells will survive in a fridge?
So it had this special enzyme in its cells.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So the idea being, if we could like isolate the hydrogen sulfide, inject it into humans, put them in a spaceship, send them off, then through the virtue of hamsters being awesome, we could just get into space.
People are trying lots of different things. You also have to worry about blood clotting as well.
Yeah.
And there are many mysteries of hibernation in that we're not sure how it's induced. Is it like sort of a cell by cell thing, or is it a top down thing where sort of like one big signal goes, hibernation time now, please? But yeah, with the platelets and blood clotting, the platelets in hibernating animals' blood sort of like disappears and no one knows yet where they go. Because if you're still for so long...
You don't need them.
Exactly. And yeah, well, you need to get rid of them so that you don't clot. We don't know, because there are similar creatures that can live. So there's an Arctic ground squirrel. So we're about 37 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
Which this ground squirrel also has as its normal temperature.
Yeah.
But it can also survive at -3 degrees during hibernation.
Whoa, -3.
But yeah, you have to be so careful. So
What's in -3 external temperature, but surely
core
it's body
temperature.
core temperature.
Core temperature.
No.
Yes,
that doesn't
the
make any
Arctic ground
sense.
squirrel. And you have to manage its bodily fluids so that they don't freeze solid. But yeah, but as I
What,
say,
it just keeps flowing? Oh,
yeah, but as I
wow.
say, you have to be so careful, because if you take a human from 37 down to 33 degrees C, your heartbeat starts to fluctuate and get more irregular. And then if you then go down to 25, then your heart might even stop. But there's so much cool stuff. Like in the Napoleonic times, infantry who were left out in the cold had better survival rates than those who were in a warm tent. Because if you're losing blood and things like that, you want your heart rate to slow down, you want your metabolism to decrease so that you're not using up those resources and you're not losing oxygen and everything else.
So cool.
Yeah, I've heard some stories about in Sweden, kids disappearing beneath the ice and being under there for minutes, or like many, many
I
minutes.
think it's 2 hours, I think it's like the record for...
I don't know how relevant this is, but Australian Aboriginals are able to sleep just on the ground in the outback. And this was something that European settlers came over and they were like, how on earth do they do this? Because the Europeans would try and sleep on the ground as well, to do as the locals do, and would just wake up shivering every night because it was so cold at night. And it turns out that something to do with the genetic makeup of the Aboriginals meant that their metabolic rate at night was slightly higher. So it kept them slightly warmer, so they were less likely to shiver during the night, so they wouldn't wake up.
Because I wonder how much that does vary from person to person. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel I'm generally hotter than the average person. Not appearance-wise.
Oh, there we go.
But
All right, Josie, back yourself.
But
Who is objectively the hottest cast member?
well, guys, I think you'll find that I'm always warm in most occasions.
Yeah, I'm really sweaty.
James, you got a question for us, mate?
I've got a question. How big is too big? And just to narrow that down, what's the biggest or smallest that an animal could be on Earth? Discuss.
So is it too big that your organs start failing? What is it? Those people that have, what is it? Gigantism
Yeah.
that they keep on growing and then they get too big and then their hearts fail.
Yeah.
So I guess the last week that they were okay before they started growing again, is that how big?
Wait, but are we talking about people or are we talking about animals?
So
as
I'm
a whole?
thinking
'Cause you
like-
got the blue whale, right? Pretty
Yeah.
chunky.
So obviously,
The chunk
from an
lord.
evolutionary perspective, if you're the biggest thing, nothing can eat you, right? Because nothing's big enough unless you've got a really big mouth.
They
Well,
could
it could
nibble on
poison.
the side. Yeah.
They could nibble on the side, but
Well, they could just
there'd have to be a lot of you.
Yeah. that's
Generally, bigger means kind of better protected. So why is there not a big evolutionary arms race of things to get as big as possible? There must be some limit, surely.
But I guess you have different forms of attack than just your size, right? So isn't it some big dogs are scared of small dogs because they know that they can yap up and get them at the neck?
And also, if you're big, you can't be sneaky. Now everyone knows that sneakiness is a key evolutionary
sneaking
advantage.
around. Wait, so there's wait.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get how big is too big?
Or too small.
or too small. I'm not picky.
But we got things that are big and that are small.
That is
So,
true.
like,
They exist.
The smallest ever animal
Yeah, what's the
Ever.
smallest?
be like a human stage 1 is pretty small, right? When you're just a cheeky little zygote.
on Poco's Zygo.
Yeah, I guess so.
So I guess that comes down to what's the smallest cell. Oh, have you heard about these massive cells off the coast of Namibs?
Massive cells.
They're like
By
visible to
Namibs,
the
do you mean
naked eye.
Namibia?
Yeah. Yeah, off the coast of Namibia in the sea, you can literally see there are bacteria floating in the sea that you can see them because they're so big.
Mm.
Naked eye.
Wait, but like they're not. Are
It's
they?
not-
Are they huge? They're just.
It's
They're
not
just, like,
easy to
big
see them,
enough
but
okay,
theoretically
right.
they're visible.
I'm
in
just
naked eye.
imagining this absolute gargantuan like bacteria monster floating around.
I'm gonna get you.
Oh my gosh, it's here in this room right now. Well, if something was bigger than a blue whale, then maybe that's why the blue whale is the biggest
So is it? Yeah, is
creature
blue whale like
because
the theoretical
that's like the
maximum?
limit. Yeah.
Because it is the biggest thing that's ever lived, right? That-
Dinosaurs
Is it bigger than
bigger?
no, I
dinosaurs?
think blue whale's still the biggest.
Yeah,
right?
because if you think of when you see like those like made to measure dinosaurs in like museums
Tiny.
and that, they're squidge.
They are
Yeah,
tiny.
tiny,
Squidge.
mate.
Squidge means small. I don't know why I said that.
They used
Titch. That's what I meant to say. Titch. Yeah. Also, Matt, you love whales. You've got that in common with Beyoncé. Have you seen that video where they were years ago interviewing Destiny's Child, and they were like, "If you could be any animal, what could you be?" And then they're all like, and then Beyonce goes, "I know, a whale." And then they're like, "Why?" And she just goes, "I love whales." and then Michelle goes, "She's
Beyonce's
wanted
so
to touch
cool.
one since she was a little girl." And yeah, it's like, I think that I think they're high on that video. I love whales.
But like animals used to be way bigger, didn't they? Like in dinosaur times.
But then no, because if the blue whale is the biggest animal that's ever lived.
But like on average, I think like stuff used to be a lot bigger because the composition of the atmosphere's changed. I think there's less oxygen now in the atmosphere than there used to be.
You could get really big insects because obviously their circulatory system is like nowhere near as good, but because there was oxygen everywhere, they could just absorb it much more easily into their bodies.
Because they don't have lungs, insects. They just
Yeah.
have these like systems of tubes, like tracheal tubes, and like they just do everything through diffusion.
But we've been growing over time, haven't we? We've
I
been
personally
getting
have
bigger.
been growing a lot.
Oh, tell us your secrets.
Fertilizer twice a day. Feet in a glass of water twice a day.
What did you say? Face in lager.
Fertilizer.
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 I kind of prefer the idea of a face in lager.
Face in lager twice a day.
What about the smallest animal then?
Well, maybe just cheeky little bacteria, isn't it?
It's not,
Does
not
that
an
count
animal
as an
though, is it?
animal?
I feel like we're
It's
not.
not an animal. Not even a
Does it have to be
Hang
like
on
a
a
not
minute.
even a
multi-cellular-
eukaryote, mate.
Hang on a minute, you're right. Okay, so like an amoeba, does that count as an animal?
Don't know.
I
don't know
Single
much about
cell.
animals.
If we're saying that an animal is an organism, therefore it isn't by its very definition a group of cells, right?
Well, an animal is an animal. It's the animal kingdoms. Animalia.
Oh, yeah,
And are we
that's
also
So
agreeing
it's
that
like
it
a
has to be
definition.
like a fully formed adult to be counted as the smallest? Because if you had anything as like a teeny baby cell thing, then that doesn't count as an animal, right?
So even a zygote
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not fully
doesn't count as an
formed,
animal.
right?
Mm.
Yeah, I think like in its adult form or free living form.
So some sort of like mite.
Yeah, maybe like a mite.
How big's a
nits.
tardigrade?
Yeah, I was thinking like
not big enough.
well, isn't it?
You couldn't have an animal smaller than an atom. That's how small's too small.
Okay, right. We've got the lower bound then. Upper bound.
Once you start
Universe.
Quark-sized
Done.
animal.
Once your environment becomes quantum mechanics, that's when all things are going wrong. Who's got the answer?
Yeah. So, anyone gonna put me out of misery? Anyone got an answer?
You're miserable, James.
I am
James,
at the moment.
James, let's talk about this. Are you okay, James?
I mean, I've been thinking about this for a long time.
About the size of the animals or about...
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a little answer for you, James.
Can you tell me?
Yeah, it's not very good, but I'll reel it out.
It'll have to do.
So, let's talk about horses.
Thank God, I've been
Second-
waiting for someone to bring horses up.
Horses can carry about 20% of their own body weight. Doesn't seem that great, does it? It seems a bit measly. Actually, I think, 20% of their own body weight is what you would give them max, knowing that you're not going to overload them. So I think they could theoretically carry a bit more. This is not a fully fair comparison, but ants can carry about 50 times their body weight. Now, often this is compared to being like us, carrying a bus, because that would be like 50 times our body weight. But no, that's not really very fair comparison. So I was thinking in terms of like strength, because in order to be a huge thing, you have to be strong enough to sustain your own body as one of the factors. But strength doesn't scale with volume; it scales with the cross-sectional area of the lifting limb that you're using. So ants have got really, really thick legs, essentially, compared to the overall volume of their body, and that's why they're so strong. Whereas our arms are really narrow compared to the rest of our body, which is why we seem really weak in comparison. In fact, interestingly, some ants can sustain about 5,000 times their body weight. Not lifting, but as in literally you can dangle a weight that's 5,000 times bigger than them from them, due to their sturdy neck joints. Can't remember which kind of ant that was, but
the sturdy-necked ant, of course.
So obviously, we already talked about dragonflies and O2 concentration in the atmosphere, and that being a big factor. But that's because circulation is really important. Just being able to get the things that you need, like oxygen and glucose and stuff, to your cells, and that really affects how big you can get. Because as well, when you get really big, all of your cells have to be a certain temperature, right, to survive. And if you're too big, then the cells in the middle might be getting too hot. And how do you get rid of that excess heat? So you also have, and how do you get rid of the excess carbon dioxide as well? You also have to think about getting rid of waste products. But I was thinking about humans, how we could get bigger hearts, maybe, so that we could get bigger. And I was looking at people who are training to run marathons, and when you train to run a marathon, you can increase the size of your heart by about 33 to 50%.
Whoa!
It gets so much bigger. But then the other amazing thing is when you stop training, how long do you think it takes before your heart goes back to what it used to be?
Isn't it takes you 6 weeks to build muscle and 2 weeks to lose it? So is it 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, and then it just goes right back to what it used to be. I then took a little bit of a tangent away from animals because I forgot what I was supposed to be answering. And I was looking at just big living things. So there's this really cool tree called Pando, and Pando is actually it's an aspen. It's a quaking aspen actually.
What is an aspen?
An aspen's it's a kind of tree, I guess. But aspens are quite they're quite unusual in that most trees are both male and female, but aspens are either male or female. I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to which one this is in a moment. But this one, it's called Pando, and it looks like 47,000 individual trees, but it's all the same tree connected by the same root system.
Where is it?
I think it's in Utah. Whoa. Can't remember. But yeah, it's pretty huge. And altogether, it weighs about 6,000 tons, they reckon. But wow. The biggest giant sequoia tree, General Sherman, I think it's called, weighs 5,500 tons. So even just that one tree is only a little bit smaller than all 47,000 sort of tree bits that make up Pando. So yeah, Pando is obviously huge, but giant sequoias are huge.
Oh, giant sequoia! I thought you said General Sequoia, as if the tree had been given a title.
Yeah, General Sherman is the name of the massive.
Oh,
the
General
biggest
Sherman.
one.
Sorry,
yeah.
yes, you did say General.
It's in California, right? I think.
I don't know where. Yeah, I think
it might be Kings Canyon National Park or something.
It's getting very specific. James, have you been there?
I've been there.
James, are you General Sherman?
Is that any way to talk to your superiors?
I'm sorry, General.
At ease, soldier.
I think that tree should run all of the world's military.
It would always be barking orders at them, though.
But it would really get to the root of the problems,
No, we're branching.
Anyway.
Turn over a new leaf.
Let's leave it there. I hate puns.
I know, but I do them all the time.
Really saps my energy.
But anyway, let's go back to the animals, because that's what I was supposed to be answering. Blue whales are twice the size of the largest known land dinosaur.
Wow.
At least. So far, obviously there might be other dinosaurs that we might discover, but blue whales are way bigger. If you look at the skeleton of a blue whale, it's actually quite small, but because you've got the support of the sea holding it together and giving it buoyancy and stuff, it can just get massive, which is great. I'd love to be that big. Imagine owning that much flesh attached to your body.
You would like that.
Just once, just for a day.
You'd be so well respected, wouldn't you?
A Freaky Friday, you
flesh
swap with a whale.
Flesh equals respect. Everyone knows that. Anyway, so it's really difficult to work out what the biggest living animal ever was, because we may well be yet to discover what it could have been. So instead, I looked up this old thing that I saw a while ago done by Randall Munroe, the guy who does XKCD comics, where he looked at what would happen if you took a mole of moles and put them in space. Because obviously a mole is like the thing they use in chemistry, like it's just this ridiculously big number for like a certain number of atoms or particles or something. And he was like, if you took that many moles and you squished them all together, because that would be like a big animal kind of mass, and that was what I was thinking about. This mole of moles would be bigger than the moon, and it would get really hot, I guess, because all the moles would be like starting to decompose, I suppose. But because of the decomposition of the moles, that would create so much heat that then that would kill off all the bacteria and then sterilize the kind of mole planet or moon that would exist around the Earth. But because the moon would like literally have a fur coat, that would prevent a lot of the heat loss. So it would stay really, really hot, and you'd have kind of like plumes of like hot meat and bubbles like volcanoes kind of coming out of the mole moon. And finally, that moon of moles, once it reached a kind of stable point, would have enough calorific content to feed the human race for 30 billion years. So
Scientists, get a move on.
So thanks, Randall Munroe, for that mole of moles, and I'm sorry, James, for not really answering your question. And we have arrived at the end. Points have been allocated by Sam Lee, our producer, according to a system that none of us understands. Sam, what's the verdict this week?
Well, in a bid not to wake the hibernating bear that's slumbering in my corner of the studio, I'm going to cut to the chase and declare Matthew today's winner, with his unique ability to lower his abdominal temperature to minus 2.9 degrees Celsius, the same as the hibernating Arctic ground squirrel, making him by far the coolest member of today's podcast panel.
Yes, I'm glad you detect that. I'm glad you know me well, Sam. For now, thanks to Josie Peters.
Thank you.
Sophie Ward.
Cheers.
James Hay.
Thanks very much.
Matthew Shribman, that's me, our producer, Sam Lee, and to Unbound for their generosity in hosting and supporting us. You can follow us on social media by searching A Piece of String or String Podcast.
If you would like to find out more about astronomy and astrophysics, find me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and the internet at JCAPeters or josieapeters.com.
And if you want to find out more about bits of human biology and psychology that I find interesting, then please check me out on YouTube and Twitter at Soph's Notes.
And if you'd like to find out about many and various scientific curiosities from a man occasionally in a bath, you can follow me on social media by searching Science in the Bath or Matthew Shribman.
And if you want to find me, I will be on World of Warcraft under the character Gargatron.
If you have a quirky question of your own that you'd like a scientific answer for, then please reach out to us on any of our social media channels.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back again in a fortnight, and as usual, let's never speak of any of this ever again.